18. Variation and selection. Variation differences between individuals of the same species. Continuous variation results in a range of phenotypes between two extremes, for example, height in humans. Discontinuous variation results in a limited number of phenotypes with no intermediates, for example, tongue rolling. Discontinuous variation is usually caused by a single gene. Discontinuous variations cannot be changed by the environment. Continuous variations are usually controlled by a number of genes affecting the same characteristic and can be influenced by the environment. Mutation is genetic change. A mutation is the way in which new alleles are formed. Gene mutation is a random change in the base sequence of DNA. Mutation, meiosis, random mating and random fertilization are sources of genetic variation in populations. Increases in the rate of mutation can be caused by ionizing radiation and some chemicals. Adaptive features. An adaptive feature is an inherited feature that helps an organism to survive and reproduce in its environment. Adaptive features of a species can be recognized from its physical features. Hydrophytes are plants that have adaptive features to live in a watery environment. Xerophytes are plants that have adaptive features to live in very dry environments. Selection. Some members of a species may have variations that enable them to compete more effectively. These variants will live longer and leave more offspring. If the beneficial variations are inherited, the offspring will also survive longer. The new varieties may gradually replace the older varieties. Natural selection involves the elimination of less well-adapted varieties by environmental pressures. The inherited features of a population can evolve over time as a result of natural selection. The development of strains of antibiotic-resistant bacteria is an example of natural selection. Selective breeding involves selecting parents that have characteristics of interest in the hope that their offspring inherit those desirable characteristics. Selective breeding is used to improve commercially useful plants and animals. In natural selection, the environment selects those individuals that will produce offspring, while humans select those individuals that breed together in artificial selection. Keywords: variation and selection, color blindness, sickle cell anemia, genotype, phenotype variation, continuous variation, discontinuous variation, natural selection, artificial selection, mutation, evolution, gene therapy, codominance, incomplete dominance, inbreeding, outbreeding, competition, survival of the fittest. IGCSE and O-Level Smart Biology. M. Rashid Chatter 0304610457. Glossary. Evolution, the sequence of gradual changes over millions of years in which new species may be produced. Hemophilia, an inherited blood disorder. Blood from wounds clots very slowly or not at all. Natural selection, a theory proposed by Charles Darwin, suggesting how evolutionary change could have occurred. Root pressure, pressure causing water to pass up the xylem from the living cells of the root. Short MCQs with right answers. 1. Which row about variation is correct? 2. Which statements are correct during both natural selection and artificial selection? 1. Only certain individuals reproduce. 2. Alleles are passed on to the offspring. 3. In humans, what is the genotype of a red-green colorblind male? XRY4. Which term is a genetic change? Mutation. 5. Which definition of continuous variation is correct? Variation that results in a range of phenotypes between two extremes. 6. What is an example of a characteristic that shows discontinuous variation in humans? ABO blood group. 7. Some lizards in a population had longer leg bones than others. They were able to climb better than the lizards with shorter legs, so they were able to escape from their predators on the ground. Over time, lizards with shorter legs died out so that all the lizards in the population now have longer legs. Which process has caused this change within the lizard population? Natural selection. 8. What is mutation? A change in a gene or chromosome. 9. What is unlikely to be affected by the environment? Blood group. 10. What is an example of a characteristic that shows discontinuous variation in humans? Blood group 11. What is not a feature of hydrophytes? Leaves rolled up and covered with hairs 12. Which feature is a leaf adaptation for living in the desert? Rolled along its length 13. What is a mutation? A change in a gene 14. Which characteristic shows discontinuous variation in humans? Tongue rolling 15. Which is an adaptive feature of hydrophytes? Stomata on the upper surface of the leaves 16. How do the leaves of hydrophytes differ from those of xerophytes? Thin cuticles 17. Which human phenotype is affected by environmental and genetic factors? Body size 18. Which feature is an example of discontinuous variation? Blood group 19. When growing millet, farmers choose seeds from high-yielding plants. Which biological practice is this an example of? Artificial selection 20. Which type of variation can be inherited? Variation caused by genes, variation caused by environment. X21. HbA is the allele for normal hemoglobin and HbS is the allele for abnormal hemoglobin that causes sickle-shaped red blood cells. Which row correctly matches a genotype to its phenotype? IGCSE and O-Level Smart Biology M. Rashid Chatha 030046100457. Genotype: person has sickle cell anemia, person has resistance to malaria. HbS HbA X22. Which row best describes human blood groups? Affected by environment has no intermediate phenotypes, shows continuous variation, shows discontinuous variation. XX23. Fitness is defined as the probability of an organism, 1 and 2, in the environment is in which it is found. Which words correctly complete gaps 1 and 2? 1, 2. Surviving, reproducing 24. Plants are adapted to survive in different environments. Which are features of xerophytes? Cuticle number of stomata. Thick few 25. Which statement explains why the allele for sickle cell anemia is commonly found in human populations in certain parts of the world? It protects people against malaria. 26. Over the last 30 years, some antibiotics have become less effective in treating bacterial infection. What is the reason for this? Natural selection 27. Farmers have bred Holstein Friesian cattle to produce more milk than older breeds of cattle. Which process was used to produce these cattle? Selective breeding 28. What is not affected by the environment? Blood group 29. The development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria is an example of natural selection 30. Why is the allele for sickle cell anemia common in some parts of the world? The sickle cell anemia protects against malaria. 31. Which statement describes how a species becomes adapted to its environment? Genetic variation gives rise to different phenotypes which may have a reproductive advantage. 32. The events listed may happen in a population. 1. Better adapted organisms survive. 2. Mutation. Results in variation. 3. Survivors pass on their alleles to the next generation. 4. There is a struggle for survival. Which sequence may lead to evolution in the population? 241333. Some disease-causing bacteria survive treatment with an antibiotic. The bacteria have undergone a process of natural selection. 34. Which statement is correct? People who are heterozygous for the sickle cell allele have a resistance to malaria. 35. When antibiotics are overused, they become less effective. Which statement is correct? The antibiotic does not kill resistant bacteria. 36. Which adaptation may be present in xerophyte? Stomatal hairs and rolled leaves 37. Desert plants have evolved to survive in places where very little water is available. Which process is reduced to enable them to retain as much water as possible? Transpiration 38. What is a feature of natural selection? It involves the selection of advantageous phenotypes. 39. In areas of the world where malaria is present, the sickle cell allele is more common. What is the reason for this? Heterozygous individuals with the sickle cell allele are less likely to have malaria. 40. What makes tongue rolling an example of discontinuous variation? Tongue rolling is something that a person either can or cannot do. 41. Which leaf feature is an adaptation of xerophytes to their environment? Hairs surrounding stomata. 42. Which feature is an example of discontinuous variation? Blood group. 43. How does artificial selection differ from natural selection? Selection is not based on adaptation to their environment. Artificial selection does not involve competition for resources. 44. A species of insect usually has pale-colored wings. This helps to camouflage them on pale-colored tree trunks. A few of the insects in this species have darker-colored wings. After A. IGCSE and O-Level Smart Biology M. Rashid Chatter 030046100457. Number of years the tree trunks become darker in color due to environmental changes. The insects with dark-colored wings become more common than insects with pale-colored wings in this species. Which process causes this change in the proportion of insects with dark-colored wings? Natural selection. 45. New strains of the crop plant wheat can be produced by crossbreeding disease-resistant plants with those with high yields of grains. What is this an example of? Artificial selection. 46. Which feature would help a plant to survive in a dry environment? Thick waxy cuticle. 47. What occurs as a result of artificial selection? Disease-resistant crops. 48. Adaptive features are inherited features that increase fitness. The probability of an organism surviving and reproducing in the environment in which it is found. 49. Some plants have small leaves with thick waxy cuticles. Which row describes the effect of these? Features on water loss and the type of plant that has these features. Effect of water loss, decreases, type of plant, xerophyte. 50. Which statement about variation is correct? Discontinuous variation results in few phenotypes with no intermediates. 51. Which adaptation is shown in the leaves of hydrophytes? Contain large air spaces. 52. Which statement about selective breeding is correct? It involves parents that possess desirable features. IGCSE and